Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are talking all about how to avoid a DNF. So this week's episode is all about how to set yourself up for success to make sure that you have the best possible chance of finishing the race that you sign up for. Now, I want to start off by saying that even with the absolute best possible preparation, you train perfectly, you fuel perfectly, you prepare everything, even the most experienced runner who's done everything right might still have a day where things do not go to plan, things that are completely out of our control, and you may not be guaranteed to actually finish your race. But you have a far less likely chance of that happening if you do take some steps to prepare yourself, your physical body, your mental preparation, your gut, your equipment, everything like that. And having all of these things in place to give yourself the best possible chance of finishing your event and avoiding a DNF. For anyone who isn't familiar with that term DNF, DNF means did not finish. So to get a DNF at a race means that you did not complete the race. And so obviously our number one goal when we sign up for an event is to finish the event and to actually, cross that finish line and get our medal. We might have a lot of other goals too, whether it's a time goal or a performance goal or whatever it might be. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we sign up for a race with the intention of wanting to cross that finish line. Why might somebody sign up for a race and not end up crossing the finish line? I mean, there's a few main reasons, kind of a few sort of categories of reasons. It might be that they just weren't prepared. Something happened with their training. Maybe they didn't know how to train properly for the event. They didn't do enough training. They maybe had a training plan that wasn't specific enough or correct for the event they're trying to run. Or maybe on the day of the race, they just didn't know how to pace themselves. They went out too fast, ran into issues with injuries, maybe an injury they got during training that then is kind of coming back into play during the event. Or something crazy can come out of the blue, like you step into a pothole on the road and you roll your ankle, or a crack in the sidewalk, or something crazy like that. But again, that kind of falls in the category of things that aren't like really within our control, unfortunately. I mean, I think we've all been in race scenarios where we've seen somebody just simply trip and fall out on the race course. And it's, heartbreaking and devastating when that happens. We want to take steps to avoid that happening to us as much as possible. But obviously, unfortunately, not everything is going to be a guarantee. The other big one that we can work on in training and things that we can control in our training would be GI issues and like having gut issues that can prevent us from finishing a race. So we're going to talk today a little bit about how we can prepare our bodies to avoid that being an issue. And then, of course, we have, race day condition. A lot of times, especially in recent years, we've heard a lot more about crazy weather conditions, whether it's extreme hot or maybe extreme rain, coming into play and impacting our ability to finish our races. I've been in a race personally where they ended up canceling it. About 45 minutes into the race starting, they decided they had to pull the plug and cancel the race. But we were already all running. We'd been running for like 45 minutes. And so then it was just sort of this chaotic mishmash of like people getting told they had to stop running and getting, sort of pulled off the race course, and other people being told they could continue. And it was just, a little bit of a communication nightmare for everyone involved, unfortunately. But you never know what those race day conditions are going to hold. Maybe it's weather, or it also could be the actual race course conditions that maybe we weren't prepared for. Maybe you live somewhere that's super, super flat like I do, and you've signed up for a race that is somewhere very hilly and very different course conditions and a very different kind of geographical situation that you're finding yourself in. And again, it's that physical preparation that we just may not have been ready for or aware of. So how can we avoid a DNF and how can we set ourselves up for success with finishing our race? I've got a few tips today that I'm going to share with you. The first one, my number one tip, is start training early enough and give yourself enough time to prepare for whatever race it is that you're signing up for. This is everything from, running your first 5K or maybe trying to run a faster 5K all the way up to training for a marathon, an ultra race, a trail run, especially with trail running where the conditions can be so technical that a half marathon or even a 10K very technical trail run might take you significantly longer than a road race of the same distance. So start training early enough. Make sure you've given yourself enough time to prepare. A question that a lot of runners have is, well, how much time do I need? Like if we're talking about, okay, give yourself enough time, what does that look like? How much time exactly is that? And it really, unfortunately, like all things, the answer to the question is it depends. It depends on your experience level as a runner, how long it's going to take you to physically train yourself to prepare for an event. A lot of that's going to hinge on how much running experience you have in your history, what your goals are for that particular event, what your fitness level is, how much you've been training, what your base volume of running is before you actually start your formal training program for that event. If you have a history of injuries that you're rehabbing, and how much time you have to train on a weekly basis. You might be somebody who can get in 3 runs a week and that's it. Or maybe you're someone who can easily run 5 or 6 days a week. And that's going to come into play when we're trying to determine what is the optimal length of a training program for you. You're better off, though, giving yourself a little bit more time to prepare than less time. You don't want to be cramming because you can't cram for this. This is a test that you cannot just squeeze in more training in a shorter period of time and think it's going to go super well. You need to have that recovery time and that rest time in between workouts. But you want to make sure that you've thought about your taper weeks. If you need any of those leading into the race, you want to make sure you've thought about vacations that you might have coming up. Maybe you've got some weekends where it's going to be hard to get in a proper long run. So you want to make sure that you've planned around that. So just looking at your calendar in advance, marking off those weeks that you're not necessarily going to be able to train kind of optimally or maybe follow a training plan. And then you want to add those weeks to your total length of training. So for example, if you were going to do a 16-week training plan, which is going to be about 4 months, but 16-week training plan, but you look at your schedule and you've got, maybe a 2-week taper, and then you've got 3 weeks that you're going to be on vacation over the next 4 months. Well, maybe you need more of a 5 or a 5.5 month training program that's going to take into account those weeks. Those weeks in your training plan could also be down weeks or deload weeks, weeks where we do reduced mileage to allow for a little bit more recovery as we build. But, and that might work out great. And that's definitely one strategy that I use with my clients. But you at least want to be looking at the calendar far enough in advance from the day that you sign up to the day of your race, so you know how much time you have to prepare and how much time you need to prepare. If you're training for a 5K race, and it's not your first 5K, like if you're not doing sort of a couch to 5K or kind of signing up for a 5K as a new runner, then, you can improve your fitness and improve your speed for maybe a faster 5K. It might just be like a 10 or a 12-week training program that you follow. That might even be long for some people. You might just work on 5K specific training for 6 weeks leading up to that actual event because you've already got that established base of running. But if we're talking about something longer, like a half marathon or a marathon, then you definitely want to already have an established base of running. So you already want to regularly be running 3 or 4 times a week. It's okay if all of those runs are easy. You don't need to be doing speed work at that point in time, but you want to already be consistently, comfortably running 3 or 4 days a week, then getting into that actual half marathon or marathon training plan. Even still, you're going to want to give yourself a minimum of 3 or 4 months to follow that race specific plan, especially if your goal is to like improve your time, if you have something beyond just finishing the race. If you are talking about ultra running, if you're looking to get into, the ultra running space, this depends a lot. Like there's so much variation because even just ultra races in general, there is so much variation in what that means. That could be anything. I mean, an ultra race is anything longer than a marathon. So a lot of popular distances would be 50 kilometers, which is 8 kilometers or just over 4 or 5 miles longer than a marathon. So, yes, it's longer than a marathon, but not like tremendously longer, not that much longer than a marathon. But then you have things that are like 100K or 100-mile races, which are, more than double the length of a marathon. So, in terms of how long you need to get ready, realistically, you should have a very solid base of running, have a pretty good amount of race experience before you're getting into leveling up to those types of events. Again, especially if you want to have the best possible chances of finishing those events. So, giving yourself enough time to prepare is absolutely key. Realistically, it may take you a lot longer than you sort of expected to get ready for something like this. Maybe you thought that you could start running as a new runner who's never taken up the sport before, and you can run a marathon, within the same calendar year. And maybe you can. I've seen people do it, but sometimes that comes with a lot of, maybe pain and suffering and injuries, and you're just getting by. You're just gonna be able to finish that event along the way. When giving yourself maybe an extra 6 months to build up your running base, do your strength training, get your body ready for the demands of a marathon, and get your body ready for the demands of a marathon training plan, ultimately would serve you a little bit better. But if we're talking about building up to a shorter distance, you definitely don't need to have quite as much of a base, but it is still a good idea to have that regular running routine established before you start almost any amount of race specific training. The other reason that we want to give ourselves enough time to prepare is not just because we physically need to prepare our bodies for the demands of racing, but also so we can start practicing our fueling and our hydration strategy for the day of the race. This is especially key for people who are going to be running, essentially a half marathon distance or longer. If you're going to be out there running for longer than 2 hours at a time. So again, this is going to be a lot of people who are doing half marathons, everyone doing full marathons or anything longer than that. If you're going to be running for longer than 2 hours, then we definitely want to have a fueling strategy for that intra-race fueling. And of course, hydration is going to be important. Making sure you're staying hydrated, even for shorter races, is a very good idea. But having more time to practice, having more time to create that plan is a great idea, because the more we're able to train our gut, which means helping our gut get adjusted and tolerate food and fluid coming in during runs, during races, is important so that we don't run into GI issues on the day of the race. But also so we have lots of time to figure out what works for us. There are endless options for sport products, whether it's gels or bars or chews or sports drinks, or whole food options, granola bars, pretzels, fig bars, cookies, crackers, you name it. There are so many different things that one can fuel with during a run. And there's pros and cons to all of these different categories of foods. And so if we don't give ourselves enough time to prepare, we don't have enough practice runs where we're trying different fueling options or trying different hydration options, then we might get to race day and we're bringing along some stuff with us that we haven't really given a good go yet. We might not feel confident in that race day fueling strategy. And that sometimes can go poorly for us. We also want like the practice of physically eating and drinking while we're running, either on the go as we're actually running, to be taking sips of fluid or to be putting things and chewing and swallowing and kind of doing all that as we go. That takes practice. It doesn't just come automatically to most people. Or if we're going to be using a walk break scenario, then, again, we can incorporate that into our walk breaks, and we can hydrate and we can fuel during our walk breaks. The reason that this is so key is because we want to really get our digestive system adjusted and accustomed to functioning while we're running. Because typically what happens is when we are training, when we're running, we have less blood flow to our gut because more blood flow is out and supporting our working muscles. So that blood flow is redirected out into our working muscles away from our digestive system. This then, we take a gel or we take some sports drink or even just drinking water. And because we don't have as much blood flow in and around the digestive system, that can lead us to having that fuel or that fluid just sitting in the gut, not going anywhere, not being digested. And so this is one of the major triggers for people then having symptoms, whether it's cramps, acid reflux, nausea, gas, bloating, diarrhea, as they're running, is that we have this undigested fuel sitting in the stomach, and then it's causing and contributing to those symptoms. So training our gut, actually getting our bodies adjusted to getting fuel in and digesting fuel and absorbing those carbohydrates and getting that fuel out to our working muscles while we're running, is something that just takes practice. And the more opportunities we have to practice, the more time we give ourselves to practice, the better we'll be and the more confident we'll be in our race day fueling strategy. So ideally, if you're starting from zero, if you're someone who, isn't fueling at all right now during your long runs, then that can definitely get in your way when it comes to whether or not you're going to be able to finish a half marathon or a full marathon or beyond. For shorter runs, like I said, where you're running for less than 2 hours, that's a time when hydration is really important. But as long as you fueled well prior to the event, you do have a better chance of finishing. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't fuel on those shorter races. It doesn't mean that you don't need to take anything. It definitely can still support better performance. It just isn't a matter of like whether or not you're going to finish, period. So if today we're talking specifically about avoiding a DNF, then definitely if you're going to be taking longer than 2 hours to finish your event, then I want you to have a fueling strategy for during that run. That's going to start during your training with fueling on runs for longer than an hour. Anytime you're running for longer than an hour, it would be a good idea to bring some fuel along with you to help you train your gut to be able to tolerate those things. Earlier in this season, I think it was episode 2 or episode 3 of season 2 here of the podcast, we talked all about intra-run fueling. So please go back to that episode and listen, and you can get some more ideas and some more suggestions for your intra-run fueling. How much you need is going to vary a little bit. It could be anywhere between 30 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. Again, just depending on the event that you're going to be training for. But definitely if you're not currently getting in 30 grams of carbs per hour, we want to start there and then build up if we need to. We also want to use this time to practice our carb loading strategy in advance. This is going to be before our long runs. Now, we don't need to do a full-on carb load, the 2 or 3 days of carb loading before every single long run. But at the very least, the night before our long runs, and maybe even, throughout the day as well, we want to be practicing getting in more carbohydrates to be fueling our muscles as much as possible. Again, so that on the day of the race or on the days leading up to the race, we're not doing all of this really crazy new stuff that our bodies aren't used to, because then it can make race day feel that much harder and potentially go south if we are all of a sudden eating way more than we're used to, taking in a bunch of new foods that we're not used to, having a fueling plan that's different from what we've practiced with, all of those things. We want to make sure that we're heading into race day as prepared and as confident as possible. So we want to give ourselves enough time to train, and we want to be practicing our fueling and our hydration plan early. So incorporating that into our training basically from day one. As soon as we start that training plan, we should be thinking about the fueling and the hydration that go along with it. The next thing we want to do to avoid a DNF is to understand the conditions that we will be racing in. So this means if we're traveling for a race or, whatever the season And this could be everything from like potential weather conditions that we're going to be running in to like the course geography. Is it really hilly compared to what we're training at home? Is it going to be at a different altitude? Is that going to be a factor? Is it going to be, much windier? Is it on the coast? Is it in the desert? Is it in, someplace more tropical? What are the conditions going to be like compared to what we're going to be training in? This is so, so important because we don't want to put all of these hours, all of these months into training and then show up to this race and be like, oh no, I am completely unprepared for the environment of this run. Now, sometimes we can train and we can, incorporate certain aspects of training into things like running more hills, finding a place to run hills if we know we're going to be running in a hilly environment compared to what we live in at home. Or maybe there isn't as much of that just built into like our long runs and just running outside. Other times, if we're talking about like altitudes and, a big change in altitude for a race, we want to incorporate that into maybe our travel plans. If we aren't able to get to that higher altitude environment quite a few days in advance of the race, then we actually want to get there as close to the race as possible. And so just some things to think about when it comes to traveling for an event, understanding the conditions that we're going to be racing in and how that might impact our preparations and some things that we want to keep in mind so that we're as prepared as possible, because preparation is key, as you can see from a lot of the things that I'm sharing in this episode. The more prepared we are, the better our chances of having a successful race day experience. The next thing we want to think about, and this is really key and kind of goes into this whole conversation we're having about preparation, is nothing new on race day. This means no new foods, no new fuel, no new gear, and no new pacing strategy. So we've talked already about wanting to practice not just our fueling and our hydration, practicing with our pre-run meal, practicing with our carb loading strategy, just having all of those things that we're consistently doing before our long runs and before some of our other workouts so that we know exactly what we're going to do on the day of the race. We've got everything ready. We know what we're going to use for fuel. We know what we're going to use for hydration. We know how we're going to carry it with us, in terms of gear. We know what pack we like best, or if we're going to do a handheld bottle. We know what clothes we like to race in. We know what gear works best for us, what shoes we're going to wear. We want to have trained to some extent in the shoes that we're going to be wearing. We don't want them to be like totally worn out or anything. We don't want to have, run for 6 months straight in the same pair of shoes and then we're going to wear them for the race. We definitely want to make sure that we've shoes that have lots of wear left in them for the day of our race. But we don't want to have anything brand new gear, new shoes, new anything on the day of the race. It's all about what we've trained with, what we're comfortable with, what we've prepared for. But I also want to talk about not coming up to race day with a brand new, out of the gate, never before tested pacing strategy. And this is probably the number one thing that I hear from runners, sometimes very experienced runners, but definitely people who don't have as much race experience is, I went out too fast. I couldn't maintain that pace. I blew up and then I did a negative split. I ran the second half of the race slower than I ran the first half of the race. Or I was feeling really good off the start line. I was feeling so good. So I picked things up and then I got to, the halfway point or wherever it might be. And then I just started to fade. And next thing you know, I was walking, or I was doing way more walking than I had planned for, right? Because walking might be part of your race day strategy. And that's great if it is. You can absolutely use a walk run during a race. But if you weren't planning on doing that much walking, or you weren't planning on walking at all, then it can be very disheartening to wind up in that situation, especially when the reason you wound up in that situation is because you went out too fast to begin with. So as much as we can get a little bit of a boost from the race day atmosphere, and as much as we can get a little bit of extra motivation from the people around us, the crowds, whatever it might be, don't rely on that boost to get you through a pacing strategy that is completely beyond what you've ever practiced or ever trained with. We want to think about the crowds and the motivation of people around us to kind of get us through like any tough spots and to sort of motivate us and pep us up when we're maybe not feeling great. We get to those hard parts of the race, because if we're racing our best, there are always going to be hard parts. Even with the best training possible, you're probably not going to feel amazing the entire race. There's going to be some points in time where things are going to feel mentally or physically challenging, or maybe both. That's normal and that's expected. It's just about how we deal with that. So we can't expect that we're going to show up to that start line, start running, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes faster than what we've trained. And we're going to just have, some race day magic that's going to come together and get us through. That is very, very unlikely to be a good race day strategy. So in terms of your pacing plan, if you do have a specific time goal that you're aiming for, you want to have practiced that and trained with that as part of your preparations for your race. Again, it all comes down to planning and preparation. So that means you're going to have, as part of some of your long runs, you're going to spend some time at your marathon pace, for example, or maybe at your 10K pace. You're going to incorporate that into your training. Maybe you're going to have some workouts where you do a fast finish and you speed up as you're getting to the end, those last couple miles of that long run, so that you are practicing picking things up when your legs are tired. Now, we don't want to be racing every single workout, and we want to spend the majority of our time running in our easy zone. But if we have a time goal in mind, or we have, something that we're working towards in that regard, then we do want to have spent some time at that pace so that we know what it feels like. We've trained our bodies to be ready for that. And then we can show up to that start line with a pacing plan and a pacing strategy that is more likely to be effective and successful than just showing up to the race, running as fast as we can, and hoping for the best. So that is all for today's episode around how to avoid not finishing your race, how to avoid a DNF. And what it really comes down to is giving yourself enough time to prepare, but then spending that time wisely, looking at your training and preparation, making sure that you have a training plan that is effective for your goals for the race you're signing up for, and giving yourself enough time to execute that plan. Starting your hydration and your fueling plan early enough so you can train your gut, try different things, figure out what works for you, figure out how much hydration you need. Really have a clear understanding of the conditions that you're going to be racing in so that you can, again, plan and prepare and make adjustments as needed so that you're going to show up feeling ready for whatever the day might bring. And of course, nothing new on race day. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing right down to how you're going to pace yourself on the day of the race. I hope that you found this episode helpful. I hope that you got a few tips and a few extra tricks up your sleeve to help you have a wonderful and successful upcoming race day. If you are a runner who's looking for a little bit of help with your training strategy, looking for training plans, if you need help with your nutrition strategy, if you're struggling with underfueling, struggling with injuries, or all of the things that can affect runners, then I would love to invite you to learn more about my signature online program, the Fuel Train Recover Club. The Fuel Train Recover Club is a one-stop shop resource for runners. You can get everything that you need to prepare you for your upcoming race and help you become the very best runner that you can be. Like I said, this includes everything from customizable training plans. We have meal plans you can follow and recipes for ideas, as well as online learning education modules where you can learn everything you need to know about how to create a successful training plan, fueling strategy, hydration plan, all of those wonderful things that you need to really level up your running performance. And of course, with the Fuel Train Recover Club, you get access to coaching from me. We have live group calls every single month, as well as opportunities to schedule one-on-one private chats with myself to answer all of your questions. So please feel free to learn more about the Fuel Train Recover Club and how it can help you really reconnect with that love of running and be so excited for your upcoming races. You can find the link to the Fuel Train Recover Club in the show notes for this episode. That is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening, and we will see you in next week's episode. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.